Everybody, my name is Kristen Reel, and today we're going to cover 5 quick steps you can take to improve your resume. Step number 1. The first thing to check is length. Is your resume more than 1 page? If so, you should work really hard to try to trim it down. A couple of things you can do for that is 1, double check your information that you've included and make sure that it's actually relevant and specifically connected to whatever it is you're applying for. Second, maybe you can play with the formatting a little bit. Maybe you can move your header up. Maybe you can play with the margins. Maybe you can adjust the font size or change some things that you're using up. There's less open white space. In doing so, make sure, of course, that you don't overcorrect and turn it into a very cluttered, tightly packed document. But there's often some tweaking you can do to make more fit on a page. If you've done all that you think you can possibly do and the information that the opportunity is requiring you to provide just cannot fit on 1 page and still be readable, but that's okay. Just make sure that it's substantially onto that second page and it's not just trickling over by a couple bullet points. Tip number 2, look at the order of the information you've provided. First of all, within each of your sections, whether that's education, whether that's your work experience, internships, volunteer work, whatever it is, make sure that everything is listed in reverse chronological order. So what that means is anything that you are currently doing or most recently completed should be at the top of any given section. Now, sometimes the things you most want your employer to know might be older experiences that you've had. If that's the case, sometimes you can structure your sections so that you, instead of having just all of your work experience in one, for example, you could say related experience, additional experience, and that can help you work within that chronological guideline a little bit more. But the whole goal is thinking through, what is your employer going to see first? So what is it that you most want them to know about you? Try to get it as close to the top of that resume as possible. Same thing goes for within bullet points describing one experience. What do you think is the most significant thing you did at that job, the most connected skill set or connected responsibility to what you're applying for? Put that bullet point first, even if it's not the thing you did the most often every day. If it's what you want them to know, make sure they're going to see it right away. Tip number 3, check your verbs. So each of your bullet points should open with a really excellent verb to describe your responsibilities in an active way, not a passive way. So first of all, you're going to want to check the tense. Does it match whether you are currently at the position or whether you are gone from that position? Second, you really want to avoid generic, vague verbs. This is a chance when you have so few words and so little space to describe something to choose a really dynamic and descriptive verb that even in just that initial word is going to tell them something about what was significant about that job responsibility. Within that too, watch for repetition. If you find yourself using the same word over and over again, see if you can figure out a synonym or another way of structuring the bullet point so that you can use a different verb. And finally, highlight your own personal contributions. So if you find yourself falling into the temptation of using words like assist, support, help, any of those equivalent words a lot, generally, I would say, okay, maybe you were working with someone else on this, but look for what it was that you specifically were doing. Highlight that first. There's always a verb that is more directly related to what you were doing. Now, that being said, if you are in a situation where you're trying to emphasize your ability to work with a team or emphasize your ability to work with a supervisor because that's something that's important to the job you're applying for, then you can find ways to work that supportive language in. But usually try to emphasize what it was that you specifically were doing. Number 4, check for any gaps, anything that you might be missing in your resume. Sometimes we can get so caught up in just outlining our formal work history that you forget something else that is really pretty cool that you've done. So make sure you've thought through, what are all the internships that you've done? Has there been any significant volunteer work that you've done that maybe you aren't thinking about because that's separate from the work world in your mind? Have you had any notable cross-cultural experience? Any certifications, whether that's first aid, CPR, lifeguarding, something more specific to your discipline? And then any special hard skills or trainings such as mental health first aid, or if you speak another language, or you can code, or something else that's going to set you apart as having a skill set that would be useful for your employer. Something that can sometimes be helpful to make sure you don't forget these things is to have one document somewhere where you list everything, and it can be as many pages as you need to be, but it includes anything that you've done, anything you might be really useful down the line somewhere. That way, each time you're tweaking your resume to fit an application, you can look and see if there's something that maybe you should be trying to work into this version. Finally, pay attention to the details. While certainly your content is more important than these details, they can make a huge difference in how your information and how the way you've presented yourself comes across to an employer. So make sure everything you do, whatever you choose for formatting, is meticulously consistent. So if you chose a certain font size for headers versus an organization name versus a bullet point, make sure that the equivalent sections all have the same font size. Make sure you've used the same number of spaces in between things. Make sure that if you used italics in one place, anywhere else that a similar situation is happening, that you've used italics. Having your header match in your resume and cover letter helps create a nice, neat package. Make sure all of your dates are listed in the same way and are accurate. Watch your punctuation. All of those little things, which might seem inconsequential, really help complete the package and make you look even more hireable. And finally, as a bonus little tip, get someone else to look up your materials for you. Even if you've spent a good amount of time, even if you're really confident with making resumes, having someone else's eye can be really helpful. So, of course, shameless plug, you can make an appointment with us, with either Sarah Todd or myself, to look over your resume. And if you don't have time and you need to just send it over, we can also do it virtually via email. Either way, this can be done by handshake or by emailing careers@eastern.edu. Thanks.